The burned house horizon refers to a large geographic area of Eastern and Southeastern Europe where, during the Neolithic and the Chalcolithic, hundreds of villages repeatedly burnt down. Archaeologists and anthropologists have carried out many studies over the years to determine why and how all of these houses ended up on fire. Were they set alight intentionally, and if so, for what reason and by whom? Or were these ancient people just extraordinarily unlucky? In this video, I'm going to talk about the burned house horizon and some of the main hypotheses surrounding it. The Neolithic Revolution arrived in Eastern and Southeastern Europe around 8,500 years ago. One of the most notable groups in the area at the time was the Cucuteni-Trypillian culture that flourished in what is now Romania, Western Ukraine and Moldova from 4800 to 3200 BCE. This culture built very large settlements, some of which may have housed as many as 46,000 people. They had sophisticated agricultural techniques and made beautifully designed pottery in kilns. Another notable but earlier group from the region was the Vinca culture, whose zoomorphic and anthropomorphic figurines stand out as quite remarkable. The Vinca culture built some fairly large villages as well, with some housing populations of several thousand people. An interesting set of artifacts produced by the Vinca culture are the Tartaria tablets. Made of clay and inscribed with symbols, they may be an early form of pictographic proto-writing. However, they have never been deciphered. The burning down of entire villages was a phenomenon that took place amongst the Cucuteni-Trypillian and Vinca cultures, as well as every other culture that inhabited the region over the course of 4,500 years. It only stopped at the beginning of the Bronze Age. Over the years, researchers have carried out investigations of the burnt rubble to get a better understanding of what happened. These Neolithic and Chalcolithic houses were built using the wattle and daub method, which means their walls consisted of branches packed with soil, clay, sand and straw. They had log floors also covered with clay. When the houses burned down, the raw clay used for the daub in the walls became vitrified, leaving behind ceramic rubble. The burnt clay rubble makes up huge red layers with thicknesses of 30 centimeters or more and is a very noticeable feature of these ancient settlements. During the Neolithic, houses were built very close together, so a fire could have spread really easily. Combustible materials such as textiles would also have been used to furnish the houses, and combustible products such as grain would have been stored inside them. All these features of such settlements have led some scholars to suggest the villages could have burned down accidentally. At Gomulava and Opova in Vojvodina, Serbia, researchers have found that rubble was concentrated on individual buildings with clear rubble-free gaps between former houses. They also found that incredibly high temperatures of 1,400 degrees Celsius had been reached by the fires and that these had multiple points of origin. This means that each house was set alight intentionally and separately, and that additional fuel was added in order for such incredibly high temperatures to be reached. The houses did not burn down as the result of an accidental fire in one place, which then spread throughout the settlement. Figuring out that the villages were burnt down intentionally still doesn't tell us the full story. Some scholars have suggested that the houses were set on fire by invaders, either from nearby or far away, so either angry neighbours or some travelling marauders. But no human remains have been found within the ruined houses, and very limited weaponry has been excavated from such sites. Both of these would be expected if attacks from outside were taking place on such a regular basis that every single settlement burnt down in this way. Another idea was that the houses were burnt down to make way for an expansion of the settlement. However, after a house was destroyed, another house of the same dimensions was built directly on top of the ruins, so no additional space was needed. It's also been suggested that the smoke from such fires could have acted as a sort of fumigation technique, clearing the villages of insects and disease. But considering that the fires led to the total destruction of the place, it seems like a rather drastic and inconvenient way of decontaminating the dwellings. In the Neolithic settlement of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, similar burning events were carried out, and some of these may have been to create material for the construction of new houses, a sort of construction recycling method. But in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, there doesn't seem to be so much evidence for this either. One exception could be House 4 in Opovo, which was burnt down before its rubble was used to fill the well next to it. The well was then covered with a new dwelling, House 2. However, it's unlikely the purpose of the fire was to create this filling material. Scholars Ruth Tringham and Mirjana Stevanovic think that the destructive consequences of the fires may have represented purification and regeneration, and they were therefore lit to mark a new cycle. They suggest that when an important person in the community died, the houses were burnt as a ritual performance to mark the end of these dwellings or their households and encase them in social memory. As the clay burnt, it transformed into a red-orange colour, which would have stood out and demonstrated the change that had taken place. John Chapman suggested that artefacts and broken fragments of objects were placed in the houses before they burnt as a part of this ritual. Essentially, these burnt clay layers endured in the landscape for thousands of years until farmers found that they obstructed their ploughs. The burning of these houses ensured their continuity in the landscape, and that may have played an important socially meaningful role to the communities that lived there. Tringham coined the term Domithanasia to describe the intentional destruction of a house for symbolic reasons. She sees this as having taken place in both southeastern Europe and Çatalhöyük in Turkey, albeit the ways in which it was carried out varied in both places. For example, in Çatalhöyük, it need not have been settlement-wide burning events, but localized intentional fires focused on one house at a time. Several experiments have been carried out to test how the houses were burnt. The first was in 1977 by Arthur Bankoff and Frederick Winter. The second was in 1993 by Gary Schaffer, and the third was in 1997 by Mirjana Stevanovic. It proved extremely difficult to vitrify the clay and burn down the houses in their entirety. This implies that lots of additional fuel must have been added to the fires to reach high temperatures and bring about a total collapse of the dwellings. The fact that such effort and such resources were used supports the idea that these burning events were incredibly important community-wide endeavours that marked a pivotal time for the group. The intentional destruction of settlements was not limited to Neolithic and Chalcolithic Eastern and Southeastern Europe, even though it was a pervasive and enduring phenomenon in that region. As I mentioned, investigations at Çatalhöyük in Turkey have revealed deliberate burning events marking the life cycle of individual houses. One other interesting example is the Ness of Brodgar on Orkney in Scotland. Just before the Ness of Brodgar was abandoned 4,200 years ago, a ritual feast took place that involved the slaughter of around 400 cattle. The shin bones of these cattle were then laid around Structure 10, a building that differed from the domestic dwellings in its size and structure and was likely used for community gatherings and ceremonies. An upturned cow skull was also placed within Structure 10, and the whole building was then intentionally demolished. There are other sites too where the deliberate demolition or burning of the settlement or monument is thought to have happened. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey comes up a lot in this context as well, but now archaeologists aren't convinced that it was intentionally buried. The story is a lot more complex than that. In the later Bronze Age, it was common in many different cultures for sacred objects to be broken and then deposited in a ritual context. This is thought to have been a way of sacrificing the object to a deity, or to have been a way of removing the object's supernatural potency when it was no longer needed. As strange as it seems to us to ruin perfectly habitable buildings or break useful or treasured possessions, destruction was often associated with renewal and played an important role within communities. This is a complex subject, so I can't begin to discuss all the incredible research that has been done in this one video. However, I hope that this acts as an introduction to a wonderfully intriguing phenomenon that took place thousands of years ago. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.